Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. We all have problems we're looking to solve, and we know that there are solutions out there, but we struggle with this. How do we find the solution? Where does that nudge come from to help us take the next step and start solving tough problems? This podcast is designed to help you find your catalyst and take that next step. I'm Mike Simmons. I am a managing partner of Catalyst Axe. If you haven't heard of the update, we've recently rebranded. Catalyst Sale is now Catalyst Axe. For more information, check out the episode that we did around the Project Lab. My guest today is Tiffany Bova. Tiffany is the Global Customer Growth and Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce. This is the second time Tiffany has been on the podcast. This time we are talking about her new book, The Experience Mindset. I love this conversation with Tiffany. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Let's get to the conversation. Tiffany, it is awesome to see you again. You were one of the early guests on this podcast way back in the beginning. We'll include a link to it. And I was really excited when a member of your team reached out to me about your new book and asked if we'd be willing to have you on the podcast. And it is absolutely a phenomenal read. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for having me back. That's what it's all about. I feel like, year one, probably show 80 or something, and you're on 300 and something, maybe that was a little bit to do with it. Who knows?
There we go. I'm sure you were a catalyst. So there you go. Thank you. So why dive into the combination of experience, customer experience, employee experience, this experience thing that's happening? Why dive into experience?
Well, the name of the book is The Experience Mindset. And it was a way for me to almost finish what I started with the first book. First book, Growth IQ, was 10 Paths to Growth. The very first chapter in the book was customer experience. It's like your customer's your true north. Live and die on the hill of your customer. Like everything should be about them. Start with the customer, work backwards. All the things we've heard for a very long time about the importance of customer, all of which I totally agree with. However, in the book, I did not do a very good job. That's probably I'm probably being kinder to myself than the reality. I did not do a very good job at highlighting the keepers of a customer experience promise that brands make. And the keeper of those promises of any company is and always will be the employees that work there. Like they are the keepers. So you want to make the easiest products to work with. Well, then your product designers should be happy in what they're doing because then they'll develop better products. You want to be the best at responding to customers' needs, then your employees in the call center should be, happy. And so I really miss the employee side of that equation. And so this was my way to sort of go back and say, I've learned a lot since I wrote the first book, and here was an opportunity for me to round that out.
Awesome. And I want to get into the flywheel image that you share a couple of times in the book. Early on, you talk about level of effort. You talk about the effort required for a customer to have great experience and level of effort for an employee to have an amazing experience. Can you talk about where effort plays into things? And let's just leave it there. Okay, can you talk to where effort plays into this?
Yeah, I kind of did a little bit of archaeology expedition in coming up with this whole sort of effort concept. While not new or exclusive to me or my work, if you look back in time across the industrial revolutions, we were constantly trying to, improve, right? Productivity, efficiency, output. Can you do 10 things a day or 20 things a day? And what can we do to help you do 20 things a day? And then we crossed Y2K, if you will, and we really moved into this digital age or the fourth industrial revolution, depending on who and what, you pay attention to and what you want to call it. But when we crossed the digital sort of divide, if you will, all of the sudden, there was this maniacal focus on making the effort for customers much less. Mm-hmm. So early on, I was in this thing called the World Wide Web, sort of 99, 2000, 2001. And it was about, how many clicks to get a customer to do something, to buy, let's just say. It used to be, let's call it a dozen clicks.
Yeah.
And we raced quickly to get to one-click buying. It'll ship to you in a week, 3 to 5 days. 2 to 4 days, 1 to 3 days, same day,
yep.
Right? Reducing the effort for the customer. However, the intended or unintended consequence of doing that has been that the effort for the employee has actually increased. What they have to do to continue to satisfy that never-ending thirst for customers wanting better experience is, unfortunately, that employees either have to work faster, have to do more with less, have to log into multiple systems, are, ill-equipped to do the things they need to do for their job. And in the end, it ends up delivering this bad employee experience and sometimes even a bad customer experience because employees are delivering that bad experience. And they're sort of like, look, I didn't wake up today to make you upset. I woke up today to do my job, but I don't have what I need to do it. And the customer suffers for it. And so does the employee.
Yeah. And this is where I really like the flywheel image that you put together and how each of these things lead into each other. As if I'm hearing you right and read things properly inside the book, it's this as if we're creating a scenario where an employee has to put outsized effort in order to be able to support the customer experience. And then we're putting ourselves into a situation where now the employee is going to get stressed. The employee is going to be overworked. The employee is going to get to a point where they start to burn out or underperform. So does this start to create some challenges inside the organization from a leadership perspective?
Well, I would say this, initially when I was going down this path, kind of how it happened is I work at Salesforce and I was standing on stage 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, I didn't think it was a coincidence that Salesforce was a great place to work globally. If it's not in the top 5, it's, in the top 10, if not number 1. It was is one of the most innovative companies in the world. And it's one of the fastest growing enterprise software companies. I didn't believe that was a coincidence, but that's it's so obvious. Like, why doesn't everybody get the connection? And I'm not the first to say it. Herb Kelleher said it, the former CEO of Southwest. Richard Branson said it, the CEO of Virgin. And I sort of was leaning into the connection for us.
Yeah.
And I went to our CMO at the time and I said, hey, do you think we could prove this out? She gave me a little bit of money. We went out, we did a project with Forbes Insight. It was right as the pandemic was starting. It was a couple months before the pandemic and then boom, we were in the pandemic. And lo and behold, what we found was in the US, publicly traded companies, those that did EX and CX well, had a 1.8 times greater growth rate than those that did not. So for $1 billion brand, it was a $40 million impact. If you're a $1 million brand and listening to this, it's 1.8x whatever your growth rate is. It's not that you won't have growth if you have good CX and low EX or good EX and low CX. You'll get a little bit of growth, right? And you'll get goodness from each of those. If you improve on one, the KPIs on the others will go up. If you do both, that's part of that multiplier, if you will, of getting the benefits of both. Once we did that, it was like, maybe we're on to something. So we did a project with Edelman and they did a white space analysis to just sort of say, what has been said out there about the direct correlation or causation or what parts of the employee experience have the greatest impact on customer? Now, in full transparency, I am not an HR expert. It's not even my lane. I'm a growth person. I look at sales, marketing, customer success. So this entire conversation is around this moment that matters when an employee touches a customer. At that moment, that's what I'm talking about here in this kind of flywheel, right? So if we can go figure out what are the attributes of a really great employee experience that have the greatest impact on improving customer experience, that's what we wanted to know. And that's where we really uncovered some rich insights that has just been incredible to share. And then ultimately, a lot of it made it in the book.
So when you get in, you started talking a little bit about data. And so what are some of the metrics that an organization, and let's split out CX and EX, what are some traditional metrics that you might look at from a CX perspective, customer experience perspective, to determine whether or not you're doing that part of the equation well?
Well, look, there's no shortage of CX metrics. I mean, there's a lot. And when I was working on, there's an entire chapter on it. Hold on, it's chapter 9. I had to look on my whiteboard.
Awesome.
Just to remember. Yeah, chapter 9. When I was trying to identify, there was no way I could do an exhaustive list. I mean, it just wasn't possible. But in sharing the research initially, again, a good portion of it during COVID, I was able to do hundreds of roundtables with executives, right? Because no one had to travel. It was easy to do to get people together, right?
Yes.
And so I'd say, hey, tell me what your top 2 or 3 metrics are for customer experience. And that's kind of how I came up with the handful I talk about in the book. And so things like net promoter score or
Yep.
customer effort index or customer satisfaction scores, things like that, right? And that effort index was one that we, just talked about, where I wanted to try to expand that and say, okay, if these are the ones for customer experience, is there a matching one or a partner for employee? So if you're going to do NPS, there happens to be an eNPS.
Yep.
So if you're doing NPS, then I usually ask, are you doing eNPS? Sometimes people will go, huh? Sometimes people will go, yes, Sometimes people go, I didn't know there was one, or, we're talking about it, right? And then when you start going down, they quickly realize that the metrics or KPIs they have around employee is like retention, which is good to know. How many jobs are open? Also good to know, right? What's in the pipeline? All good to know. But there wasn't anything sort of tracking that moment where call center agent has to deal with a customer that has an impact on a net promoter score because they're going to get a survey after they hang up, right?
Right. Yep.
Right. But does that employee get a question like, hey, how easy was it for you to solve that problem for your customer?
Yeah.
Did you have the information? Could you find the information? One question, 1 through 5. I think very quickly people would realize that they have this rich information in real time about the customer, but they don't have the correlating data for the employee.
I think this is one of the cool things that's happening with some of the sentiment. And I think that's the right word, sentiment analysis on certain things. So like if I walk out of the restroom at the airport at Phoenix Airport, there's something that comes up in it. You pick whether or not your experience was good or bad. Like the smiley faces, things that where it's not a lot of cognitive load to rate it a 1 to 5 or go through 10 different questions. Just like, how do you feel? I even see it in my Garmin app. My Garmin app, if I go for a run or I have a hard workout, it will give me an opportunity to tell the device whether or not I had really exerted myself or didn't exert myself from a qualitative perspective. And then you start pairing that with some of the quantitative data, and it becomes really interesting, the kind of insight that you can draw out of things. One of the stories that you share that I think is fascinating, and I don't know how many people are familiar with it. So if you could go a bit deeper into it, I think it might help some folks. But when I say Ritz-Carlton and the flexibility they give members of their organization to work in this kind of environment, how would you describe what they do and how they go about doing their work?
Well, their tagline for this was "Ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen." Right?
Phenomenal.
People serving people. I mean,
yes.
Right? And we're going to make sure that the people who are serving people have what they need to be the best they can be at what they do. And being hyper responsive and personalized and give them autonomy and enable them to do what might be best, right? There's a problem in a room. If it's not resolved within a certain amount of time, then team members will swarm that problem very quickly. Or people, team members will get a stipend of so much money in order to make something right for a customer. And that really gives and pushes the ability to do what's best and right for the customer at that moment that matters, down to the people who are actually doing the work. So, I mean, it sounds basic, right? It's like...
It is super basic. It's fundamental and it's fascinating. I don't know what other words we could come up with. What I don't understand is why we as leaders struggle with creating an opportunity for the simple things to work inside our organization. In other words, why do we overcomplicate this stuff?
I don't know. One of the opening quotes of Growth IQ, my first book, was a study from Bain about businesses above 5 billion and below 5 billion. But regardless of those two numbers, because I'm not going to remember them, I'm going to blend it. Businesses. It was in the 90% range that say the majority of the reasons that they're unable to create sustainable and repeatable growth is internal inertia, not external factors. Now, mind you, like that's kind of like one of the opening quotes of the book. And then I said right after that, unless it's a black swan event, and boom, 18 months after the book was published, we had the pandemic. So I was like, can I take that sentence out? But anyway, so minus a black swan event. But this internal inertia really is wedded in these bloated processes, disconnected systems, siloed parts of the organization. We just make it really hard to do their job. And so when I was trying to figure out what's a framework, right, or something I can put together, because as I've been told, one of my superpowers is I can take lots of data points and then very quickly aggregate it and kind of find the nuggets that then I can push back out, right? To say, look, there was a lot of things, but if I had to distill it down to 1, 2, or 3, boom, here it would be. Now, it may not be what someone else might come up with their own 2 or 3, but I'm just saying, like, so I had to say, I can't throw 100 things at leaders or even individuals because it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I took advantage of the PPT framework, which is people, process, and technology.
Yep.
And each of them had their own chapter. But what I did was I added a C to the end of that framework, and that's culture. So it's PPTC. And so within people, within process, within technology, within culture, there are things you can do to start to optimize, transform, and innovate within your business in a much more digestible way because it's overwhelming. There's so many things coming at you externally. To-do list internally is never ending that it almost leads you to inaction, right? Just doing nothing.
Right. I think it's fascinating to pull culture out or add culture to this equation. When in your experience, when people say the word culture, what are some common mistakes that they make around the definition of the word culture or even thinking about culture?
Well, again, in transparency, right? I'm not a culture, HR, like that's not my lane, right?
Right. Yeah.
But what I did was I separated people and culture by adding culture.
Right.
Because I didn't want people to then get lumped together with the broader culture of an organization, where people is organizational structure, like how things happen, right?
Yeah.
You got process, which is obvious, and tech, which is obvious, but culture is kind of the temperament. Like, do I feel safe raising my hand and saying something isn't working?
Yeah.
Do I feel I can show up to work and be my whole self? Do I feel like my career is supported? Do I feel like leaders do what they say and say what they do? That isn't a people comment, right? That is a culture comment, at least how I've defined it. So again, it is an aircraft carrier conversation, and I'm talking about kind of a speedboat here, right? Like it's a very small subset of everything that goes into culture.
Well, what I think is fascinating about it, and why I believe it's so important, and why I was really excited to see it in the book, is in my experience, there are organizations who will pay lip service to what the culture is. Then culture will grow or change organically, and it may or may not align with what the culture is on the tin. And there's opportunities to actually do things by design to help improve that culture, which is the stuff that you talked about in the couple of examples that you shared, whether it was around Southwest or using the Ritz-Carlton as an example, where you're basically giving people an opportunity to understand this is the identity we have inside our organization. This is how we make decisions inside the organization. This is where we have an opportunity to change things. And when we need help, there's a clock where people can come in and jump together. So there's this culture of how we operate, which is, I think, so much better than some statement that is put up on a board. To me, it feels like a state of being. Do you think, am I off?
Well, if you like, what we did was, and I sort of alluded to this at the beginning, that we wanted to understand what were the key attributes within the employee that had the greatest impact on customer. Trust was one of them.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And trust happens to be the first value at Salesforce as well, but trust was one of them. So that is a value. That is part of the culture. And then the pandemic hits, employees get sent home to work. And then what happens simultaneously is that there's this huge surge in employee tracking software sales. So you trust them when they're in your four walls, in your cubicle. They go home, you no longer trust them. So what does that say to your people? Like in some call centers, I read, that they were making call center agents keep their cameras on.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes not everyone has the luxury of having a special space or a private space where you can, quote unquote, work from home. It's your kitchen table. It's your living room. It's your bedroom. You live in a studio. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I actually don't want to share all of my life, with some customer on a customer service call. It's not an employee with another employee. It's a customer, right? In my quote unquote, in my home.
Yes.
So if trust is it, that is a cultural thing, right? That isn't anything more than that you make a decision and the signal is we don't trust our people when they're not in the office.
Yeah. It's a fascinating example. especially as you see so many organizations working to bring employees back into the office. The question that comes to my mind with a lot of that work is are they bringing them in because they firmly believe that they're going to create a better environment for people to work, they're going to create a better environment for customers to be successful? Or is it because leaders don't know how to manage when they can't see people? And I know and I thought your example, this is an aircraft carrier problem, and we're talking about speedboat components to it. But any thoughts on that movement? I know we're getting away from the book, and we'll come back. Well, it's tied into the culture piece.
So no, it actually is. So let's go back to culture, right? Yeah. We're talking about this. So do you mandate from the top, everybody has to come back in the office, period, regardless of role? Or do you say, hold on, by team, by group, by project, that let's figure out the flex working schedule based on the reality of that team. So for example, if you're a delivery driver, you cannot work from home. I mean, you're driving, right? You might start from home, you might bring the truck home, but you get it. Like you're not working from home at that point, right?
Yes.
You may say call center reps, maybe we could do flex. Okay. You may say you've got a team that's working on a project. So every other week, 2 days a week, people come in. Or the core team has to be, you know what I'm saying? Like whatever it may be. But now this goes back to alignment. Like you ask me as an employee what works for me. The employer asks, we ask what works for you.
Yeah.
We find compromise where it works for everybody. But to blanket say everyone's more productive in the office, everyone's more productive at home, everyone like peanut butter, the solution.
Yeah.
That I'm not a fan of. Now you may go through that exercise and realize we should bring everyone back. But then that's the conversation, right? Then people feel like I participated in my reality. Yes. They asked, I gave feedback. They didn't agree with what we said. I wasn't the only one who said, I don't want to come back to the office, right? Whatever it might be. Right. And so then the company, the leaders come back and go, we heard from a majority, a good portion of you that you didn't want to come back. Here's why we need you to come back. Let's create an environment where people want to come back. And we also have an entire generation that maybe has never worked in an office because of the pandemic, who has to get connected in a way that we've learned you can replicate pieces and parts of it remotely, but that human connection is just very difficult. Some people are working for people they've never met. They're working on teams they've never met, like they've never been to the office. And I think there's a downside to that too.
So how can leaders get better with communication with their people? Because now we're getting in that people area. How do we improve at communication?
I think when the pandemic first hit, at least here at Salesforce, like it was a seismic shift on frequency, recency, topics. You know what I mean? Like it was a seismic shift of once a quarter to literally twice a week to then, kind of once a week. And then we gave other things, one Friday a month off, Thursdays, no meetings. And then we got Slack, and then it was async meetings. And we were constantly pivoting, right, to accommodate what was happening as things were getting tighter, opening up, and obviously we're global. So there were different rules dependent upon where you were in the world. But what I worry about, this is beyond a statement about us, is what I worry about is we don't snap back to the bad habits of once a quarter. It's an email communication. It's a recorded video. It becomes disconnected again. Like we learned a lot of the power of being that transparent, empathetic, understanding, listening. All of those things are really good. So how do we keep those things in maybe not a weekly meeting? Right? Maybe it's twice a month. Maybe it's once a month. Maybe I don't know what will work for your organization, but I just don't want to go back to pre-pandemic habits. Yep. I think we've learned a lot. And by the way, I think we've learned a lot about the things that the company was ignoring, which was around the employee.
So one of the other things that I like about the book, that in the way that you segment things, and we talked a bit about the people technology, or in PPT, people process technology, and then adding culture. When it comes to problem solving, being able to compartmentalize in one of those four categories can start to shrink down the challenge. How are organizations thinking about technology and its impact on creating a better experience for both employees and customers, and taking this experience mindset? Where does technology play into this?
Yeah. So through the research, technology was the greatest disconnect between the C-suite and employees.
Okay.
So I'll give the example. It's like 54% of executives of the C-suite believe that the technology they're providing is effective. Which means 40 something percent know it isn't effective, which that's embarrassing in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if they ask them how many of the executives use the technology or when the last time they used it.
So hold that point because
thank you.
Right? So hold that point. Great one, by the way. 32% of employees agree that the technology they're provided, that's just sort of the general employee population.
Yeah.
And only 23% of customer facing employees agree that they have the tools and technology they need to collaborate effectively, get done what they need to get done. So that was the biggest disconnect. And when we asked employees what the number one thing was for allowing and helping the company to grow, like the biggest challenges they have, tied for number one was outdated tech. It was number 6 for executives. So that was that big disconnect.
Yep.
And so back to your comment, I normally get asked right behind it, why do I think that is? And I think in customer facing, for sure, C-suite executives are most likely, more often than not logging into those customer systems, right? And so just use Salesforce, use CRM. How often does a CEO or C-suite log into Salesforce? I don't mean getting a forecast report or a pipeline report or a deal sheet. Like, I don't mean that. I mean, log it in, looking at leads, see what's coming in, what's happening in the pipe, poking around in a deal. I think they get a dashboard or, a nice presentation about what's happening in the business. Or when was the last time they went and opened a ticket in their ticketing system or tried to do a return on a product? Like, right? So I think part of it is they're just unaware.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is an absolute miss. That's a cultural problem, right? That too disconnected from the front line. You want to do outside in, like start with the customer, work backwards, very, sort of Steve Jobs, right?
Yeah, sure.
I would say work from the front lines back into the business, right?
Yes.
And the front lines meaning those people that are touching customers, delivery, installers, customer service, salespeople, marketers, whatever it might be. But those front desk people, like your receptionists, your cleaning people, like if you're at the Ritz-Carlton, right? Your concierge, your valets, like start with the frontline people. And tech now is so woven in everything that every employee does. There's almost no industry where tech doesn't play a part. Now, it may not be CRM. If you're in the mining business, you're drilling for oil, it's probably not going to be a CRM system, right?
Yep.
But it's highly technical. Yes. Where do we drill? How deep do we drill? Like it's technology based and the success is tied to it. So there's so much work that has gone into spending billions of dollars around digitally transforming businesses. And along the way, going back to your comment a few minutes ago, we've overcomplicated the use of tech in work when it is much easier in our personal life, right? Like adding something to your Apple Wallet is one click and then you could go and pay for it. But when I need to get something at work, it's 3 people have to sign off on it. I have to go look for it. Like what's approved of what I can buy? Like what's my spending limit? Oh, I don't have a corporate credit card. Like we could go on and on and on and on and on.
Well, and you think about technology like Slack, it's so many times Slack was integrated inside organizations outside of the organization really going out and doing a group buy. It was a team inside an organization that wanted to get better at communicating, usually on the technology side.
That's how Salesforce won too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how Salesforce won too early on, right? It was sell to the sales department, avoid IT. Yeah.
And then you get into all of these challenges with the stack. So is there a perception that we can just solve this problem by throwing more technology at it? And does that start to compound some of the challenges associated with that experience mindset? If we are just throwing technology for the sake of technology at it because there's so many new providers that are out there, are we actually solving for the right problem? Is that another challenge that we're running into?
Yeah. So there was a stat many years ago when I was still at Gartner that I'm going to do this from memory, but it was like 2/3 of IT department's time is spent on keeping the lights on. Then there was a little bit in there that was for innovation activities and then a little bit in for growth. And what happens over time is things that are innovative end up in the keep the lights on bucket, right? It just keeps cycling. You'll move stuff out of keep the lights on, stuff goes in the keep the lights on, right? So some of it is that. But a study actually from MuleSoft, which is another company that Salesforce recently bought, the average enterprise has 900 applications. Actually, that stat is a 2021 number. Now it's over 1,000. It's like 1,070, but going with the 900 apps, and only 27% of them are integrated. Now, if you just, let's hypothetically say within that 27 or the remaining that is not integrated, the 63% that's not integrated, there are things like finance and legal and HR, which should never be integrated, right? Because for obvious reasons. So put those aside.
Yep.
So how much is still left, right? Let's call it, I don't know, 40% should be integrated, more that isn't integrated.
Yep.
And so I always ask this question when I'm on stage, and I just did it yesterday when I was in Chicago. And I asked, how many of you can log into one tool to do your job? Not one hand went up. And then I said 5 or more, 10 or more, 15 or more, and hands keep going up.
Yeah.
And then if they're having to log into multiple places,
yep.
The awful part about that is then the data in each of those systems isn't shared. Right. So it's Mike with the same name in Canada, and Mike with the same name in California, and Mike with the same name in Singapore, and Mike with the same name in whatever. Which Mike, right? Right. And, or I don't know what products you bought, or I don't know you have a ticket open and I'm a salesperson. I'm trying to upsell you, and I don't know that you're in the midst of fighting around the product not even working. So I call and look like a total jerk that I don't care about the fact that you're having problems, that I'm trying to sell you something, right?
And now you get back into that effort discussion and the level of effort required to try to pull those things together in the time frame for which you need to pull those things together. And then the feeling that you have when you have to say, I don't know, or you give bad information. So it just creates this compounding effect at an employee level, which has a knock-on effect on the customer.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't want to show up 8 hours a day and have customers be mad at me. Absolutely not.
Right.
And I also don't want to call a customer and look like a total moron, like I didn't care enough to do anything, right? I like to be prepared before I called. So this goes back to, what I was saying, so let's say, right, you've got a leader a CFO at an organization, and they're running the call center, the customer service center, like a cost, right? It's a cost driver for the business, and they dial it up. How many calls in an hour? How many heads do we have? How much time can they spend? Yep. Okay. So maybe they're spending 7 minutes, but we're going to get it to 4 minutes, because if we can get it to 4 minutes, we can get, 1.3 times as many calls. And they just say that's the new KPI, but they didn't do anything to fix the fact that they couldn't do that many in an hour, that they couldn't do a call in 4 minutes because they had to get into 6 systems, 4 systems, 3 systems. And so there was no way to do it. So then what happens is your call center agents always go over time. They get in trouble. They might even lose their job. And they're like, hold on a second. Like, I'm trying to serve the customer the best that I can. Now let's go to culture. If I could raise my hand and say, these processes are broken, or if we could get this and that integrated, it would save me a lot of time. And I've talked with my team, and could we get that done without fear of retribution? But I've raised my hand, and culturally someone goes, absolutely, grabs it, right? Fixes it. You're now the star. You had the best fix of the month, and they get to go to a club at the end of the year, just like salespeople do. But the bottom of the barrel customer service agent who no one thinks about, right, is like, what about me? Like, I'm the one, right, saving these customers and upselling and cross-selling, which, by the way, I do not think they are the bottom of the barrel, right? I think that they are highly important to an organization.
Yes.
No question. But that is a cultural shift, right?
Yeah.
That, hold on a second, like, I cannot manage the business with just these KPIs that are false indicators of the reality of what's going on. And so that hits now people, right? It hits process, it hits tech, it hits culture in one example. And I could string that out to people who work in warehouses, delivery people, right? Front desk cleaning people, concierge, like, I don't care in what industry, there is always room for improvement, especially in those that are highly transactional jobs, part-time jobs, summer jobs, right? Because there's no affinity to the brand. They're not committed to what is happening. It kind of is that paycheck. And so how do you get differences? And that was one of the studies we did. We looked at a retailer in the US that had 1,000 stores. I don't actually know who the retailer is because it was a blind study that we commissioned. And when they started to focus on improving employee experience, they found a significant difference between full-time and part-time employees.
Oh, wow.
Kind of based on what I was just saying, right?
Yeah. Right.
Because more committed, less committed. Like, this is a career for me. This is a job for me, right? This is part-time. I'm trying to go to school. That's what's important to me. I just got to come here and do what I'm doing, right?
Right. Yep.
And so then they started sort of playing with 4 or 5 things that we've talked about. But in the end, what they found was when they improved those things collectively and intentionally, they saw a 50% improvement in revenue per hour per store employee.
Wow.
Significant.
Yes.
Significant, right? That should get CFOs interested.
Yes.
Right? And I don't want people to go, well, if we do this, where Tiffany said we're going to get 50%. It's kind of, that is just directional to show that you will get lift, not just in employee sat, not just in retention, not just in revenue, not just in willingness and innovation, in all of it. It's an and play for sure.
And the beauty of the book and the framework and the model that you share is it gives everybody an opportunity to look at the challenge that the organization is running into through each of these individual lenses. And you lay out the questions that leaders and teams should be asking each other in this environment. So you make it very simple for people to say, if we're focused on people, let's ask these questions. Culture, let's ask these questions. Tech, let's ask these questions and work through it. So although we've bounced around in the conversation around a number of the different studies and the pieces and the components that comes together, which could make it seem complicated, when you narrow things down in the way that Tiffany's laid it out in the book, it is much more digestible. And now you've got a playbook, a tool that you can use and members of your team can use when getting engaged in these conversations. And the cool thing about having the question that Tiffany's asking inside the book is nobody has to feel embarrassed raising their hand, asking the question that everybody's thinking about, but no one wants to be the person who is putting themselves out there. You can blame Tiffany for the question.
All right. Well, I'll take it and drop me a note if you get in trouble for it. I'll back you up. But there's a few things that you said. Asking your employees, look, I'll take it all the way through. If you're an individual employee and you're listening to this, you're going to be like, there's nothing I can do. Like, I have no sphere of influence. I'm an hourly employee, or, I'm a call center agent, or I'm a sales rep, or I'm a marketer, whatever it might be. If you could pick 1 or 2 things that would give you time back in your day, make you more effective and efficient, make you find more joy in what you do, you need to tell your manager. And if you are a manager listening to this and somebody comes to you, do not tell them we're too busy, or you don't care, or come back to you later, or figure it out on your own. That is a no-no. That is a miss on your part, because now what you've done is you've shut down that sort of psychological safety, that feedback loop, that trust is now ruined. And not only ruined for that employee with you, but ruined for that employee potentially ongoing, that they will never put themselves out there again. And that is a shame. I call it a confidence muscle. Like, if someone comes to you with an idea, a problem, they are flexing that confidence muscle. First time you go to a gym and you lift 10 pounds of weights and a bicep curl, the next day you will not be able to do much if you've never gone to the gym before. Right. 3 months from now, you can go to the gym and do 20-pound and you're not sore. Guess what you got to do? Raise the weight. Yep. The first time someone flexes that, be respectful, be kind, listen. Even if the answer is no, spend the time to tell them no. Tell them why. If you're a manager and you have a team of people, ask them the question. And then you go to your manager. And now all of a sudden you see it just sort of bubbles up, bubbles up, bubbles up, bubbles up. That's why I said it has to start at the front and work its way to the top, versus top-down mandates, which we've already discussed, is so disconnected because they don't know the reality of what's going on in the business, right? And so if you are an executive, a leader, and you are surveying your employees, what we also heard from the research was everyone's surveying. 76% of people don't know what to do with the data once it's collected. So pre-pandemic, it was kind of an annual survey. Because of the pandemic, it got more frequent, right? And that's why I hope we don't go back to once a year, because it's so backward looking. Yeah. And it's also like, today was a great day at work. I love working here. Tomorrow, right? It's of the little things in the airport with the smiley faces. Like, it's a terrible day. And you surveyed me today. It sucks working here, right? Right. But if you can do it in a 1 question, heartbeat across each group, each unit, each division, each region, each team, all the time, it flattens out those highs and lows of, we'll take the high ones out and the low ones out, and it's the middle. Well, So if you're going to ask questions, do not collect the data and do nothing with it. That's why, to your point, like, right, making it digestible making it small, bite-sized question, answer, fix, question, answer, fix. So the last thing I'll say on that is one of the stories in the book is a co-founder and former CEO of a company called Clearco out of Canada. And her name is Michelle Romanage. She's on Dragon's Den Canada, which is kind of Shark Tank, the US. And by the way, she's a double unicorn. So let's guess she knows what she's doing. And she was in hyper growth mode. And so the people, right, exponentially were growing. And she felt like the culture was getting a little confused, right? And were we over processing? Like you said, like, are we making it too complicated? Like we're too small to get this complicated, right? So she set up an email box, and we're amongst friends. So I apologize up front if anyone is offended. If you have kids in the car, maybe turn down the volume for just a second. But she set up an email box that says stupid shit we do at clearco.com.
That's awesome. Okay?
Really rudimentary, like basic. Like, let's not overcomplicate this and hire a third party and bring in consultants and run a 100 question survey. Nope. Set up an email box. Okay. She set up an email box, and lo and behold, people answered. So now here's the culture. She could have taken all that and gone like, well, we'll get to it. But instead it was, hold on a second. Let's look for commonality. Let's find the things. Let's create a list. Let's start ticking down. And a lot of it was broken processes. Systems not integrated. I don't know how to do something. Like too many people got hired too fast. We haven't been able to, it was things that were real. Right?
Yeah.
And these are the things we heard that we're not going to do. And here's why. So in one email box, sets of emails, what was established? I asked, you answered, I listened, we fixed. I mean, brilliant. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, Tiffany's been talking with Mike for 45 minutes and there's 7,000 things I want to do, start with that. Right. And if you got a team of 500, a company of 500 or 1,500, don't send it out to everybody. Like literally, right? Do it by team, by group, or make your managers ask everyone the question and capture all the information, right? So that then you can do what I just said. Look for commonalities. There will be common threads and themes, and you can go fix it.
You can go fix it. And it's the simple.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Keep it simple, stupid. Right. Like anybody who can you can set up an email box to do this stuff. It doesn't.
And you can say stupid stuff we do. You could be, you can be more G-rated.
You can even go completely on the other end and go R-rated.
Right.
And really blow it up.
Right.
Tiffany, this has been an awesome conversation. I enjoy the stories. I enjoy the reflection on the data and being able to pull these pieces together that bridge the gap between those people who are saying, hey, this all seems really nice in theory, but I want to understand what it looks like in practice. And the reality is the data comes from people who are putting it into practice. And you'll know your data when you put this work into practice. One of the quotes that you have is, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few.
It's a good
Why
one.
is that an important quote to you?
So it's from a monk, not me. And our CEO, Mark Benioff, uses it quite often as well. So I have repurposed it. And I would say, look, I've been in and around selling technology literally for 30 years. I was Eloqua's beta client. I was Constant Contact's beta client. I was selling domain names in 1997. I owned my own domain names in 1998, 1999, 2000. Had I been smarter, right, I would have bought Disney.com. Dumb me. However, clearly not that smart. But I digress. I have seen a lot. I've led small teams, large teams, startups, Fortune 500. And I can tell you that the worst thing I can hear from executives is, it's not the way we do it here. We tried it. It failed. So I'm not going to try it again. Or I don't think our culture could handle it, or whatever the reason is, why not? Much of that comes from the expert's mind. Because we've been doing it for so long, we have the shorthand of what we know will work versus what will not work. The beginner's mind is, and usually when I'm on stage, this is my first slide. And what I ask for is, just give me a little space today to come up with one thing that makes you feel uncomfortable, that you're scared to do, scared to try, that you maybe you tried it in the past and you're afraid to try it again. But if you can give yourself that kind of space and time, not only when I'm up here for the next 25, 30 minutes, however much it is, right? But every day that you give yourself 15, 20 minutes to have a beginner's mind to say, okay, what is a problem I'm trying to tackle today? And I was going to do it this way, but is there a different way? And how would I find that different way? Do I talk to someone outside the company? Do I listen to a TED Talk? Do I listen to Mike's podcast? Do I read Tiffany's book? What do I do? that is sort of the inspiration for me to go, okay, I'm going to try it this way. Because the worst that can happen is it doesn't work, right? You either win or you learn. We don't need to talk about failing. So the beginner's mind is absolutely critical for you to be able to approach some of these things we're dealing with: burnout, overtaxed employees, customers with ever-changing expectations. Growth is getting more difficult, supply chain issues. I mean, we could go on and on. Financial, are we in a recession? Like everything of all the reasons why it won't work. But give yourself one reason, one thing every day to just try what might. And that is that beginner's mind of opportunity.
Thank you for being the leader that you are. Thanks for joining the podcast. Where can people find out more about what you're working on? Where would you like to send folks?
Oh, they can obviously check out the book, The Experience Mindset, out on June 6th. Super excited. My second child, and I think my last. I think I'm done. They can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm really active on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I have no more connections left, so you're going to have to follow. Follow me on Twitter at Tiffany_Bova, Instagram and Facebook as well. And then I've got a podcast called What's Next with Tiffany Bova. So those are all the ways you can keep in touch with my work.
Tiffany, this has been phenomenal. If you know of someone who would enjoy this conversation, please share it with them. Let Tiffany and I know via LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, whatever social network you use. Sales is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?